I am so excited to be here with Jim McKelvey and Jack Dorsey, Square's two co-founders, to talk about all things Square and how it started, what the origination was, and how we're thinking about the developer community. So, for those of you who don't know, Square started because Jim, who owns the glass blowing factory, was unable to process a payment and was really bothered by that, understandably, about losing customers, and started pairing up with his pal Jack, and they came up with this solution. So I'd love to hear from the two of you how you first connected before Square even was born.
So Jack came to work for me at a company that I actually still have, but at the time we were very poorly managed and supplemented our bad management with his mother's product, which was chocolate-covered coffee beans, which we would chew up and keep the staff awake. So Marcia Dorsey was effectively our dealer. And we found one day that her son liked computers. That's all we knew. And so my partner invited Jack to come over to work with us, and he happened to show up in the middle of this chaotic mess and pulled an all-nighter with us the first night. So we sent him home at 5 in the morning, and I guess I'll let Jack finish the story since I think it goes on from there.
What I got yelled at by my mom. She hated Jim, cursed his name to this day, but has forgiven him for some things. But no, my parents always encouraged me to follow my own path, and competing was one big part of that. And Jim's company and that work was a great way for me to experience what I ultimately wanted to do, which was programming. And I was super early into programming computers at that point.
Another story some of you may not know is Square's very first customer was a woman named Sherry who owned Lily Bell Flowers in San Francisco. And when Jack and Jim finally had a prototype for their hardware, they approached her at a market and asked her if she wanted to try it out, taking credit card payments. She showed a little bit of hesitancy and wasn't quite sure, but just as they were having that conversation, a potential customer, walked up to her and said that he didn't have any cash, but he would go get some and come back. And so they waited around, and lo and behold, the customer never returned. And so that really helped just fuel even more so the need to create this hardware and provide this to sellers who are trying to capture every type of payment. So I'd really love to hear, how does this kind of customer centricity lead to innovation?
Well, it wasn't one time that we did that. We went down to Sherry multiple times, and asked her if she would try what we're working on, and she repeatedly said no, um, until the point when she lost a sale. And that was the biggest insight. We originally thought that we were building a credit card reader that plugged in the phone and had an easy um, app that got you to the Visa or MasterCard or acquiring gateway. But ultimately, what we learned in that moment, and I don't think we realized it in that moment, but what we learned over time was it wasn't about building the credit card reader, it was about making the sale, helping a seller make the sale. If we focused only on building a little plastic device that plugged into the headphone jack and build some software around that, we'd be a very, very small, not very impactful company. But because we focused on a deeper problem, which was how do we help a seller make the sale in the first place, we expanded our entire universe of solutions. So a credit card reader is one solution, a point of sale is another solution, because it allows someone to see their entire business and get analytics around how they're doing and make better decisions. Um, Lending is another solution, um, which came in the form of Square Capital, and so on and so forth. So by going a little bit deeper into the observation, what we were seeing, we created something much more valuable than what we started with.
Yeah, it was also interesting when we got the first iPad. because instead of being restrained to this much screen area, we had a full iPad's worth, and so that naturally led us to thinking about all the other things that our customers had to do. We had some customers at that point, but not very many, at least not compared to today. And it's really interesting if you think of payments as this wonderfully honest form of communication. What you spend your money on are things you value. What you spend your money on is almost as important as what you spend your time on in some ways. And so it's a really interesting insight into what matters for a business. And if you start connecting to that, it naturally leads to a very rich ecosystem.
That's awesome. Talk to me about how you engage with the developer communities as you were building up Square. Were there certain forums that you all used or communities that you contributed to? How do you think that's changed, if any, to today?
When we first started, we didn't. I mean, we consciously decided not to engage with the developer community because we had a bunch of experience with APIs in the past and like how much they could potentially be abused. And given that we were dealing with money and moving money around, we want to make sure we had a lot of control over how our system was working. And we didn't have enough people, staff, engineering resources to make sure that we could build the right constraints to start. So we didn't really start with the developer community until a few years in. And again, it was a conscious choice. Our first focus was one specific customer, which was a seller who otherwise would not be able to accept a credit card. And we just stayed focused until we had a much stronger base and a greater understanding of where to go from there. And then as we got the right engineering talent and we understood like what we were building and we understood like what the right endpoints were, we started building out the developer community. And a lot of it came from, just making sure that anything we built internally, ultimately, could we export it externally? Like, we should be a client of our own platform, ideally. And that's how we originally started building the system. And, in many cases we succeeded, in some cases we failed, but we were able to learn very fast and build a platform that I think, not only exposes a bunch of new functionality to the world, especially around commerce for sellers, but also encourages entirely new ways of doing commerce and doing business. And that's just on the seller side. We have much more work to do on the Cash App side, which is super exciting as well.
I'd also add that, there's sort of an inherent respect for the developer community because both Jack and I are engineers. So it's sort of odd to have a company founded by two technical folks. But, I remember back even when Jack was working with me almost 30 years ago, he was contributing to the open source community. He was writing for Linux. I remember Twiddler, the corded input device that you wrote a driver for. That plus open source has been an area of, sort of deep respect. And so I think, although we kind of came to it late, I think we came to it well. And I think you see that respect in the products that Square offers and the way we treat developers.
I want to switch now to talking about support and how we think about the interactions that our sellers have with us. As Lauren mentioned, I have the privilege of leading the customer success team here at Square. So my team knows definitely how critical it is that we are providing great experiences to our sellers and helping them through really critical time-sensitive initiatives that are really challenging to their business. So I'd love to hear from you. What connections does Square enable for its sellers?
So I think the most important thing that Square does for the sellers is it makes much of the tedium invisible. In other words, if you use Square, if you're part of our ecosystem and you're running your business, you can spend just a little more time focused on your business as opposed to worrying about accounting, withholding, and paying off this loan and managing all these various connections. And one of the great tragedies that people experience is they're good at something they've got this skill and they say, oh, I'm good enough, I'm going to open a business. And then when they open that business, they realize that they don't get to actually do the thing they're good at because they're buried with all this other stuff. And so what we've always tried to do at Square is just sort of make those problems go away. And Jack and I always discussed in the early days how the ultimate success would not to be famous, but would to be invisible, to actually be this utility layer that didn't get noticed. And I think we still aspire to that. And to the extent that people use our products without even realizing how much is going into those products, it's a big win.
Jack, anything to add there?
No, I mean, the name of our company kind of indicates what we want to be, which is plain, out of sight, foundational, boring. We didn't want to put our brand before our customers, ultimately, whether the customer be our seller or a developer. We wanted to fade into the background as much as we could, and we chose a name accordingly. It's a boring brand by design. When we were first talking to our designers and brand people, they got so upset and insulted that we wanted to build a boring brand because their work is anything but. But it takes a lot of work to build something that is a brand that is so foundational and nondescript and invisible that it is apparent. We had a lot going for us, and just our hardware, the shape of our reader was our name. The structure of our first iPad register indicated the same shape, even though it wasn't exactly that. So we relied a lot upon what people put on top of their counter to reference our brand, more so than having a flashy name or something that was truly in your face.
Yeah, if you're excited about your payment system, it's probably negative energy.
That's true. Very true. Jim, I'd love to hear, how do the connections that Square creates fit into the notion of the innovation stack?
So I was confounded by something that happened at Square, which is that we survived an attack by Amazon when we were still a startup. And I couldn't answer the question, how did we survive? And so what I did was I went on this, it was basically a 2-year research quest looking at other companies that had been in the same situation. And I discovered something that was really interesting, which was that all the companies that had been in similarly deadly situations and had survived and thrived were all focused on very, very small customers and enabling people who had essentially been excluded from the market. And this was true in banking, it was true in furniture, it was true in transportation. And I found hundreds of examples of this phenomenon. And when I sort of dove down into it, what I saw was that at the core was something I sort of had to come up with a name for. I call it an innovation stack. And it's the mess that you have to create when you're doing something new. And that was sort of the big insight of the book, which is that Square, because we were trying to serve customers who were basically excluded from normal rails of commerce, as I was, as a small glass blower, but, as my friends were, like, I know what it was to be left out. And then when we started to build tools for these people, what we discovered was that the entire payments ecosystem assumed that people like our customers weren't there. It just drew the line and it said, we're not going to serve anybody below this line. And so what Square did is we started building new tools for ourselves first to make these connections. And that collection of tools became an innovation stack. And I saw this pattern again and again and again. So that's why I wrote the book, was because it's this very powerful message, which is to say that by serving the underserved, you can create something that's so powerful that it can, withstand an attack from a company like Amazon and ultimately grow into something that's very, very significant.
So thanks for that. One of the reasons I personally love working here at Square is that we're a mission-driven organization with a strong purpose, believing that the communities we serve are our most important foundation. So I'd love to hear from the two of you on how do the connections Square creates connect with the communities we serve, or how should they?
Well, I don't think it's any different from our customer focus. Like we have to be in tune with who we're serving, and those people are in tune with a particular community. and those communities might intersect with a bunch of other communities that we're not aware of. So I think the simplest answer to your question is just like to be very customer focused. And one of the challenges in building Square early on was, Jim had a glass factory and would blow glass and sell it, but it wasn't his every single day like the people we were serving. They were trying to build coffee stores, and there were flight instructors, and there were flower carts that were going out every single day and selling something. So we weren't our customers. And when you are building something where you are your customer, the next step is fairly obvious. When you're not the customer, the next step isn't as much. So you have to observe a lot more. You have to talk with our customers a lot more. You have to understand what they're trying to do and not take direction from them, because if you take direction from them, you tend to get into a situation where you're building something for a very specific niche, instead of something that's more broad-based. So it's observing patterns, listening, learning like what connects all the dots, and then adding our own opinions on top of it, and then building ahead of our customers' expectations. So we had to really build up a muscle of getting better at talking with who we serve on a more regular basis, and that's why we put an emphasis on customer service early on in the company. Jim was often found in the headphones he's wearing right now on the phone with people who are angry at us, or in rare cases thrilled with us. And in every one of those conversations we learned something, and enough of those conversations inform decisions going forward.
Yeah, having seller DNA at the core of the company was super helpful. For instance, Square didn't hold any focus groups. Yeah, there were like no one-way mirrors in our early days. And I still think today we stay in touch by a very organic connection to people and what their lives are like and how they run their businesses and how intertwined those things are. And, one of the things that we saw during the pandemic, which I was super proud of, was how quickly Square responded to this outcry. I mean, companies were being shut down. Little businesses were like wiped out. But the thing about little businesses is they're incredibly adaptable as long as you give them the tools they need. And Square was literally on a cadence of releasing a new product on a daily basis, sometimes partial releases in the middle of the days. It was so wonderful in the time of tragedy to see a company that was still connected that closely to its customers, they could respond that fast.
Well, as we talked about at the beginning of this session, Square was born out of Jim being unable to process a payment. So how is our developer platform an extension of that initial spark? And what does it mean for Square now to have third-party developers helping ensure that sellers never miss a payment?
I think it's less about that and more about, we realize it's a self-awareness that we're not going to be able to build everything. And our value is only as good as who chooses to use us and how they choose to own what we build in their own way. So in some cases, it's very much a consumer focus, where I'm gonna use what you have and I'll customize it in my own way based on the tools that you give me. As you go a level deeper, developers come in the mix, and it might be a small business that has 4 locations that hires an independent developer to do something that the software doesn't do, but the functionality in the API allows. Or you go a level deeper than that and you create an entire company based on the platform. But it should scale to every foundational level along that. So it's how do we build a platform that enables people to, as they get more sophisticated with their understanding of what they want, they can build with complete optionality, with complete freedom, without having to think about us at all. And I think in both Jim and I, our cases, like, as we've learned about technology, we've been able to go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And as the technology unfolds gracefully, you can make it more powerful. And as people make it more powerful, Square becomes more valuable to those developers, those customers, and also to the world. So the more we can open up, the more we can give back in whatever way, the more people we're going to be able to serve ultimately.
Jim, anything to add there?
Only that, the humility that you have to have if you start dealing with massive numbers of customers is not lost on me or this company. The needs of the individual businesses, these are really very specific. And I love the fact that we've got a developer community right now that's helping us meet those needs better. Because as Jack said, we can't build for everybody, but we can give an API and expose the things that we need to do to make them work. And I was literally in a place a couple of weeks ago where somebody had, they were not in the United States, but they bought the Square hardware because our hardware was so awesome that they were using the hardware because it was the thing that served their need in a little community that had been just like devastated by the pandemic. And I was happy to see that, in that case, they were able to pick something from our stack and make it work.
That's great. Well, we're down to our very last question, and it's a big, bold question. I'd love to hear from the two of you. What is the 5, 10, and even 100-year plan for Square?
Well, I believe that anyone who has a firm understanding of what the next 5 years or 10 years or 100 years looks like, or how they might build, is probably wrong. I think the more important thing is to understand the trends. And I think the trends that will affect us the most will be artificial intelligence, will be cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, having a native currency for the internet, will be regulatory issues, both defensive and proactive by various governments around the world. Those are the things that will impact our company, our business, our customers the most. And it's not a question of like having a perfect roadmap or a vision for the next 5 or 10 years. It's more about being agile enough to understand this is the trend. It's obvious. Here's what we're going to do with it. Are we going to utilize it to our advantage, or are we going to react to it and block it in a particular way? Are we going to ignore it at whatever cost? It's that understanding that I think is the most important. And for us, over the next 5, 10 years, to me, those are the biggest trends: AI, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and regulatory.
Yeah, I would just say that, the core of this is humility. The thing that you want to not do is think you know what the future is going to hold. Because if you do that, you'll end up making decisions, and then you tend to cling to your decisions when evidence tells you otherwise. And we've seen that, in the last year played out. I have to really compliment Jack, because before it was trendy to do remote work, Jack was at the board of directors saying, we're going to have remote board meetings. And all of our board members were like, no, we'll miss the dinners. And, Larry Summers gives great hugs, and we didn't want to have this, we didn't want to have our party broken up, but Jack was adamant that we needed to do this. And then lo and behold, we get a pandemic and we don't miss a beat. The other thing that I think is important, and is something that I watch through these little proxies, is what's our cadence of shipping product? What's our cadence of getting solutions out to customers? And I've seen that cadence, sort of tick up continually over time, and that's so exciting, because what companies typically do is they get comfortable and then they go, oh yeah, we're just going to sit here and ride it. Like when we started Square, we really looked for innovation in payments, and we found nothing. Like the preceding decade was this complete blank as far as stuff that was done. And I'd say since then, Square and companies, that have been inspired, hopefully by Square, have really taken that innovation up. And I just love the fact that we got a developer community, because that's just so many more brains on the problem.
Although I will say, like the year we started was a very auspicious year, because 2008, 2009 is when the global banking system collapsed, and we emerged from that, and also Bitcoin and all of cryptocurrency emerged from that moment. So there was something in the air where the financial system was ready to be questioned, and we had a few answers, and Satoshi had a few answers, and others had more answers as well. But there was something special about that time that I think will carry forth for the next few decades that we're all going to learn from, and I think will impact the world in a positive way.
Couldn't agree more. Very excited to see what comes down the road. Well, thank you so much, Jack and Jim, for participating in this session. And for all of you that are viewing it from home, we appreciate you taking out the time to hear from Square and our co-founders.